Okay, so I'm recording now. Does everyone see that on the top right of their screen, like the little red circle? Perfect.
Yep.
That means I'm doing it correctly then. So, hi everyone. It's nice to have you guys in this smaller group. I think that in today's like hour we have together, we're going to be going through my lesson plan demo where you're going to see me teach to some other SPIs and some professional staff members, and then I'm going to go through my lesson plan, which I have since annotated with a bunch of questions for you. And basically the goal is to see like what a FIGS class like looks like, in the closest sense that we can in this kind of context. We're also going to be discussing lesson plan construction, and I'm going to be able to answer any questions that you have and to give advice from my own lesson planning process. So I'm going to be screen sharing and playing a recorded demo that I did, I think, 2 weeks ago. And then I'm going to screen share my lesson plan, and we're going to go through it. And I have like a bunch of comments, and then we're going to have a little bit of a Q&A. So with that, does anyone have any questions before we get started? No? Okay, cool. So I am going to open the video. Just bear with me while I figure this out. Okay, now, do you guys see the video? Cool. Is it did you see it start there? I'm just gonna hope, okay. Then I am going to mute, well, I guess I can't mute myself. I'm gonna play this for you then. If it stops working, please unmute yourself and let me know as soon as possible. And let me I don't know if I can mute my mic. I'm gonna mute myself right now and I'm gonna play the video. Can you let me know if you can still hear sound? Just give me a thumbs up. Got it. I'll be unmuted. All right. Thank you for your patience. And I'm going to start the video now. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see all of you today. Today, we're going to be talking about science education. Female STEM educators can be inspiring figures and are key to our academic success as female college STEM students. We're going to begin today's course with our first career spotlight. So just as a preview to the rest of the class, we as a Careers in the Sciences FIGS cover 5 career spotlights over the course of our 10 weeks together. This is meant to highlight some different careers that you may not have seen before and that you may end up being interested in. We're going to be exposed to a lot of new information in college, and as a FIGS instructor, I want to make sure that I'm doing my role and encouraging you to explore all of it. This week, we, as I said, are going to be focusing on science education. You can be an educator in many different capacities, but today we're going to be focusing on high school science teachers and college science professors. So first comes first, what educational requirements are there to become a teacher? Now, these are not hard and fast rules, and these kinds of regulations and certifications depend on the state where you would like to teach. In general, a bachelor's degree is required. For high school teachers, you would generally major in the field that you'd like to teach and take education courses, or even minor and double major in education to supplement. And for a grade school, you would generally major in education. As I said, that's not a hard and fast rule. For many people who I know at Rutgers who want to pursue education, this is the kind of path that they take. Student teaching is required at least in New Jersey to become certified. And the same state certification requires other things, such as exams like the Praxis exam. Many teachers will also obtain a master's degree for higher pay, and Rutgers has an awesome accelerated master's degree program that only takes 5 years to get your bachelor's and your master's in education. To become a professor, college professors generally need at least a master's degree and, generally speaking, a PhD to teach. This is because professors are often expected to be subject area experts. To have really specific graduate study, supplemented by years of researching, teaching, assistant teaching, and postgraduate study, that's what gets you to the point where you're an expert, and that would make you the best candidate to become a college professor. Universities do prefer to hire professors with experience teaching. So in graduate school, TAing is often really important, and even if you can start TAing as an undergrad, which is something that I do with the chemistry department, that sets you up for success much later down the road if you ultimately want to pursue a career as a professor. There are a lot of challenges in being in education, but there are also so many benefits. It can be really difficult to balance learning needs of students. and it can be really difficult working with prescribed curriculums from the school. It's even hard for me as a FIGS instructor to work with the prescribed curriculum from the FIGS program. I know it's for the best, but when you're really passionate about a subject, it's hard to limit yourself to something that's given to you. It's difficult to discipline students, oftentimes for many teachers, even if they've been teaching for decades. Incorporating technology can be really challenging as well, because as we all know, like there's new technological developments, it seems like every other day. And that can be really hard for teachers to try to keep up with the times, so to speak. For professors, you'll often have to manage a full-time research lab on top of teaching, which is quite the challenge. Managing an entire research lab of graduate students and undergraduates on top of teaching several courses per semester is really difficult for your time management. And also, many teachers and professors are underpaid in the United States. There are many benefits, though. You can share your passion with your students. And I think that if you speak to any professor or college or teacher from high school or even elementary school, this is the first thing that they say. They love their job because they love to share their passion with their students. And to get to inspire other students to pursue that passion is extremely rewarding. You make a difference in your students' lives as well because you're able to share that kind of positivity for a subject matter. There are also some other more fun benefits. You finish work by 4, which is great. You have school breaks and you have summers off. So that's really awesome, and it allows teachers to pursue other kinds of interests. I had a high school teacher who was a yoga instructor on the weekends, and I would go to her classes and then go to her English class. You know, it's a career that allows you that kind of flexibility. It's a really dynamic field. The educational field as like a discipline in academia is really evolving as we learn more about the brain and how learning actually happens and pedagogical techniques. So it's really dynamic and it's constantly being affected by the world around us, which is really an exciting part about being a teacher. And of course, you get to bond with your students. I don't know if you guys had the same experience. When I graduated high school, I friended a couple of my teachers on Facebook, and it's really nice that even though I only had them for a year, we're connected for the rest of our lives. And that's something that is a really unique relationship you get from being a teacher and having students. The salaries, as I mentioned, many people believe that teachers are underpaid. And I just want to present the New Jersey statistics and not get into that kind of argument. A science teacher has an average base pay of about $51,000 per year, and professors have an average base pay of $94,000 per year. So I'd like to talk a little bit about female representation. As you know, we stand women in STEM, but there are not that many as science teachers. Even though 77% of all teachers are women, only about half of biology teachers are women, less so in chemistry, and even less so in physics. And there's only about 1/3 of all science professors who are women. There's a phenomenon that's called the leaky pipeline. So the pipeline of women to getting to higher education is called leaky because many more women than men drop out. So this is just some statistics I wanted to give you to talk about, why you may sign up for classes that have male professors more often than you see a female name on WebReg. There are so many ways to prepare for a career in science education here at Rutgers. The Aresty Center for Undergraduate Research is my favorite one to plug. Participating in any one of their research programs, whether it's the summer science program or the research assistant program, will give you exposure to research labs. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later today. There's the Future Teachers America Club and Pencils of Promise, which are extracurricular activities that you can participate in to be around students who would also like to pursue education. You can also TA or TI, which stands for Teaching Intern, and this is something that I do myself for a class that you excel in. However, that opportunity may not present itself until you're a sophomore or a little bit older. And we also have the Rutgers Graduate School of Education, which offers PhD, EDD, and EDM programs. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a 5-year educational program, which is really common for those wishing to teach at the high school level. And I have tons of friends who do that. So if you have any questions about it, please feel free to ask me, and I will ask them and get the information back to you. So I wanted to cite the name of a professor who I have taken courses with, who researches chemical pedagogy. So pedagogy is, in general, a term that means teaching techniques. And she, Dr. Mary Amenika, is an assistant professor of professional practices, long title, in the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology. So she taught me chemistry pedagogy when I was learning to be a TA. So as much as she's a chemistry expert, she's an expert at teaching people chemistry as well and teaching people how to teach chemistry. And if any of you end up wanting to work for the learning centers as a TA or a TI, you may bump into her, and she's an awesome resource if you're interested in exploring scientific pedagogical techniques. So Now I'd like us to do a think, pair, share. And how I'd like to do this, because of our online setting, is I'm going to, in the chat box, let you know who you're paired with. And then I'm going to have you two send each other your answers to the question. And after a minute, I'll have you share what you and your partner were discussing. So I just need to minimize my screen. That's okay. So apologies. I'm going to put that back up in a moment. I just want to let you know who your partners are. And I will be putting a number next to your name. Ignore that for now, but keep it in mind for later. So, and there is going to be one group of 3, if that's okay with everyone. Okay. Okay. So has everyone seen who their partner or group is? Awesome. Please forgive my lack of an Oxford comma, and I'm going to reshare my screen. Okay. So here are the questions that you to message with your partner or your group. So let's start with the first one. Why do you think that it's important for women to be science teachers and professors? So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to type a little answer, and then I'm going to call on you when you're ready. And if you could raise your hand so I can see you in the little thumbnail. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so I can see the messages coming into the box, which is really nice for me because it lets me know that you guys are discussing it. So if you could share with the group, please unmute your microphone and let me know, why do you think it's important for women to be science teachers and professors? Whoever would like to start, just unmute your mic.
Our group talked about the importance of representation and how the only way to get more women in science is to show other women in science. And so people in teaching roles can be really influential mentors and representatives for young women.
Totally. I think that representation is such an important thing that we may take for granted. We may not think about it, but it's really empowering to see a female professor, at least for me, when I come into a class on the first day. Would anyone else like to share what they discussed with their partner or their group? Craig, please unmute your mic.
Yeah, so what Topher and I talked about, we said we think it's important because it shows girls that they can be competent and even good experts and scientists in a field that's more heavily dominated by men, and being able to see at a young age or a younger age that there's a woman in the field who's succeeding and doing well, that gives them the perseverance and I guess maybe motivation in a way to go out and try to succeed in a field that's more dominated by men in a sense.
Totally. Thank you so much for sharing. So now in the same groups, I'd like you guys to discuss question 2. So take a moment and think about it, and when you're ready, share your response. Have you had any kinds of positive experiences with female teachers and professors yet? I know you guys are new to Rutgers, so maybe female teachers from high school? I love seeing everyone's responses in the chat box, and it's really great to see that many of you have had such positive interactions with your female teachers and professors, regardless of whether or not they're science. It's really awesome to have a positive role model in that educational role like that. So I'd like us to move on to question number 3 in the interest of time. So something that may seem strange is that though a large number of STEM teachers are women, there is a clear disparity when you're looking at higher education. So if you remember, about half of biology and chemistry high school teachers are women, but only 1/3 of female professors are women. And on average, fields like chemistry and physics are around 20%, where biology is a little bit higher, maybe 35 to 40. But in general, there's a significant drop in female representation when it comes to higher education. What do you think accounts for that difference? And even for myself,
sorry for skipping through.
To imagine being limited by societal pressures and the society's the chat doesn't get recorded. Okay. Well then, I would love to call on some students to share their response to question 3. Susan, I really liked what you said in the chat, so maybe you can share it so everyone can hear it.
I was just saying that I think, especially, well, for women that are interested in going into college level teaching, because you're saying that it requires getting a PhD oftentimes, I could see the decision to go on to get a PhD and all the extra education and time that takes being hard if you're someone who sees like becoming a mother in your future and like trying to balance home life and school life. That's a big commitment on both sides.
Definitely. I think it's hard to imagine having to make that decision, especially as first-year students. It does feel like a lifetime away at this point. However, it is a decision that many women feel that they're forced to make, and maybe because of societal pressures or family influence, that certainly can contribute. Thank you, Susan. Would anyone else like to share their response? Sorry about that. Topher.
I have something, and it kind of goes along the lines of that, and I hope it doesn't stir up controversy, but I think sometimes, if women want to have a family and children in particular, you're more likely to be able to have children, like if you're trying younger. So I imagine it would be difficult to try to pursue a PhD if you also are pregnant or trying to have children. So, I think even that piece about trying to get pregnant, like the biological clock or whatever.
Topher, that's definitely something that influences women's decisions on even pursuing an undergraduate education. I have a friend from my classes who I didn't realize was several years older than I was, because she had two children in her late teens, because it was what worked best for her. And then she decided to come back to school because she wanted to make sure that she wasn't having to make that decision to choose between becoming a mother and being a parent and pursuing the career that she really felt passionate about. So that totally contributes. So I would like to move on to our next activity. As you may remember, when I messaged everyone's groups in the chat, there was a number next to your name. Is everyone able to see that, or would you like me to resend it? Give me a thumbs up if I'm good. Okay, great. So those numbers are meant to assign you a professor for our next activity. So we're doing a little female faculty scavenger hunt. So the number you assigned refers to a professor here at Rutgers. I'm going to give you time to research your professor, and then we're going to present the information that you find to the students around you. However, I would really like to give you these introductions rather than have you research so I can make sure that you get the information. So let me just share my screen one moment. So one is Professor, I'm going to share this in the chat. So one is for Professor Silvina Tomasone, and two is for Dr. Lauren Adamo. So rather than continue to share my screen, I'm going to give you a little introduction on them. So Dr. Tomasone is in the Department of Chemical Engineering. So I actually have her next semester, very exciting. And she puts out publications all the time, and it's really, really impressive. And she teaches a bunch of upper level chemical engineering courses called Transport Phenomena 1 and 2, Heat and Mass Transfer. So if any of you are interested in pursuing careers in chemical engineering, you may run into her. The second professor, Dr. Lauren Adamo, is in the geology department. And a fun fact about her is that she teaches and totally started the hybrid learning for introductory geology courses, which, as we all know, can be really useful in times like this to have a well put together curricula for an online course. She's also the co-director of the Rutgers Geology Museum. So if any of you are looking for something to do, if you stopped at the Geology Museum, you will see her influence there. Before we wrap up today, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and I'm going to introduce our next activity. So we're going to be doing a case study to help you understand the resources of the Aresti Summer Science, the Aresti Research Assistant, and the Rutgers databases and libraries. So in the same groups that you were just in, I'm going to be giving you a worksheet with questions. And I'm going to put that up right now. I'm going to make it my full screen. So there's a student named Jane who's a first-year student, and she'd like to major in cell biology and neuroscience. Many of you may have the same major. She's heard that doing research is a great way to stand out for medical or graduate school, and so she's interested in joining a research lab. However, she isn't too sure what she wants to study yet in terms of research. She's considering being pre-med, and she always liked genetics in high school, though. So I have developed 8 questions to help you decide what kinds of topics she may be interested in researching. So I have them presented here. Can you all see this? Thumbs up.
You can see the slide that says case study, Grace.
Perfect. Okay. So these are the questions that are going to be guiding you. There's really excellent websites, and you might find pamphlets as well, to provide the information that you'll need to answer these kinds of questions. And as you get to the end of the questions, I'd like you to start thinking about what research could do for you as a student to help you prepare for your career in sciences. And again, why it's important for female students like yourselves to be pursuing research in their undergraduate experience and beyond. And that's all.
Before we get started, could you just show us those questions again? We didn't get to see those on the screen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just want to make sure that everybody has the questions they need.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that it didn't show up.
Through those before we get started.
So the first one is, how can she use the Rutgers libraries to narrow down topics that she's interested in? 2, what kinds of things would you recommend her to start looking into? 3, what kinds of research opportunities does the Aresti Center for Undergraduate Research offer? Based on her potential major and her interests, are there any research topics on the Aresti website that you'd think she'd be the best fit for? Are there any specific requirements for the Aresti programs? Which Aresti programs, if any, interest you the most? Why is it important to start research early? And why is it important for female students to pursue research in college and beyond?
Okay, so that is so embarrassing for me to watch, but hopefully you enjoyed that to some extent. Before I go through, excuse me, my lesson plan for this week, I want to just tell you all my decision, the reasons why I showed you things that I did in there. So we had the option of fast forwarding through those long periods when people were typing in the group chat, but I wanted to give you all a sense of how long it actually takes students to answer questions like that. And I think that in the online setting, a think, pair, share, is a little bit awkward, especially for the instructor, because you're kind of just sitting there and it's difficult to see them engaging. However, like in the classroom setting, you know, it'll be a little bit clearer that students are being engaged for those kinds of things. I could have edited out little awkward bits for my own ego, but I thought it would be more useful to just leave it, unfortunately for me. And at the end, I was a little bit of a dummy also, because I didn't realize that when you're sharing a screen on WebEx, and you know, if things go online and you're teaching FIGS online, which you really hope doesn't happen, you will need to know how to share your screen properly. I didn't know how to. I didn't realize that if you were sharing your screen for one application, it does not transfer to another. But you know what? That's okay. I learned the lesson for us. So I'm going to pull out my lesson plan that I used for that, and we're going to go through it. And I'm going to share my screen correctly this time. So just give me 1 second. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? Because there's going to be time at the end if you just rather wait. Nope. Okay, great. Okay. So you can unmute your mic and tell me, but can everyone see this? Is it your full screen?
Yeah.
Yep. You can see it.
Is it like the full screen, or do you see my desktop background?
No, but we see like this kind of a background, not a desktop background, but
Okay.
you should make it totally full screen, I guess.
I'll leave it like that then. Okay, so this was my week 2, and it was my academic success lesson plan. So the name of the students was Articles and A+, Succeeding as a Female Researcher and Student. I was pretty proud of that name. I'm not super keen on creative little things like that, so I was excited when I came up with it. And I want to point out first and foremost that I taught the Bunting Cobb Living Learning Community section of Careers in the Sciences, and that's entirely made up of Douglas women who are interested in science. So most of, if not all of my activities and lesson plans are going to be like centered around women in science. And if you're not teaching like an all women section, like I would really emphasize to you that you don't need to like write this off, because a lot of the stuff that I do to talk about female representation can easily be made into a lesson plan that talks about like diversity and inclusion, because it's about female underrepresentation in STEM. So yes, so that'll explain why a lot of my materials in this lesson plan in particular are about like female representation and women in science. So academic success, just a note on that, this element is like deceptively difficult to write, because like as FIGS instructors, most of you are already doing really well at academic success, and you wouldn't have to be taught the kinds of things that you're teaching your students. However, the kinds of students who want to teach us FIGS are also likely to be those kinds of students, but you still have to share them, because it may not come as naturally as it comes to you or to me. And students in this element totally don't know anything about Aresti or the libraries, which you may not even need to be taught, and you just might go immediately to the library to study for an entire day one weekend, and they just don't have the instincts to do that, because as we all know, the academic rigor of high school to college definitely changes, and we just want to make sure we're guiding them through that as best as possible. And I'm going to keep my screen like this just so I could see you, because it's really awkward talking to my like Microsoft Word. So sorry if there's a little bit of background, but I just think it's best this way. So it can be a little challenging to write this lesson plan, and it definitely was for me. So I drew from my own inspiration from my experiences in Aresti RA. And I also had friends who luckily were more experienced in other things. Like, I didn't do the summer science program, but I had friends who did, so I was able to draw on them as resources. Something that was really useful for me for the professors, like the professor's scavenger hunt, was I actually made an Instagram story. And you know how you may know that on Instagram stories you can write a question and have people submit responses. So I put on my story, who was your favorite female science professor, write her name and her department, and I also posted on Facebook about it. And I got so many responses that helped me throughout the entire course. So things that you may not think of as like a good resource for FIGS writing, like are totally there. You just have to get a little bit creative. And so this is the cover page in general. Susan says that you should complete it last, and I totally agree with that. Because once you once you finish your lesson plan and you're finished writing, you're going to be able to see like, okay, I need this there, and you can put it in correctly. And just a note, I would put X copies of fact sheets because at the time I didn't know how many students were going to be in my class. And that was just something that made it easier for me. You may be wondering, like, how am I supposed to approximate if I have no idea, like, who's going to be taking the class? That's just how I did it. You want to make sure that this is all filled out, like, as much as possible because it's your tool during class. I would always print out my lesson plan for the week, and I would read it on the bus over to Cook Douglas, which is where my class was. And this especially was what I looked at before the rest of the lesson plan because I would use it as a way to refresh my memory, and I would know what I had to bring to class. So, for example, here I said I needed 4 sheets of printer paper, markers, and sticky notes, and I wouldn't have thought necessarily to bring it if I were just using my memory from the lesson planning process. So use this as a tool to make sure you are prepared to teach your class. Okay, so as I mentioned above, we're going to start with the pre-class comment I have. So I mentioned how I posted on Facebook and Instagram as ways to find inspiration for these professors. So I asked, please name your favorite professor and her department. You could do that for basically like anything that you need more, I guess, you need more creativity with. If you're having writer's block about anything, use social media and ask your friends and family, and they will definitely be able to give you answers. This was especially important for me as a careers in the sciences fix. So I major in chemical engineering, so that is like the only department that I know anything about. And for careers in the sciences figs, you actually have to give something called a career spotlight, and that's how I started. That's how I started my lesson plan. I need 5 of them, and they need to be 5 different careers. So you kind of need to know other fields and professors, and your friends can be a great resource. So in the opening, in general, I would italicize things that I wanted to read like as close to verbatim as possible, and here I underlined my thesis. I just want to let you know, like, this was a little different in my year. We didn't have to write our thesis up at the top like you do. So we would just have to make sure it was really clear what our thesis was in our openings and closings. So I just underlined this so it was a little bit clearer for you and it was a little bit closer to the lesson plans you'll be writing. Okay. So as I mentioned, we'll move on to the career spotlight. You're required to do 5 career spotlights if you're a careers in the sciences figs. They're actually, I think, a really good way to start class. You can definitely put them wherever you think is best, but I always found that I would start off with an opening and use my career spotlight as a way to, like, I guess, figure out what direction I wanted to take my class. So, for example, this week was academic success, so I talked about being a professor, and I thought it was a really, like, natural way to get students on the topic, and you can totally do that however you'd like for your class. It's just what worked best for me. And here I wanted to emphasize some points about transitions. So transitions are really important to make sure like things don't feel awkward in class. So Susan talked about that a little bit, but I want to emphasize that like writing a good transition, as tedious as it can be, is going to make your life so much easier in class. Because you're not just standing in front of your students saying like, oh my God, I know what activity we just did. I know what we're about to do. But you don't want to end up saying, okay, let's do this Kahoot now, because you seem a little bit more like a peer, not like a peer instructor. So I totally was not the best PI when it came to writing my transitions. Like, people had to tell me to do it every single time. But eventually I think I got the message, and you will too. So just practice writing them. And it will totally be to your benefit when you're teaching your class. It will seem just much more cohesive if you have well thought out transitions. And in this transition, I talked about how I wanted to continue learning about science education with a think, pair, share. So think, pair, shares are pretty common in FIGS, which I mentioned. I think my favorite part about the think, pair, share is that it's a really good way to get students more confident. So how it works is you would list questions, give a moment to silently ponder the question, and then you would have them partnered with someone, and then they would discuss their answer with everyone. And I would kind of do a think, pair, share discussion. So they think, pair, share all the questions, and then they would raise their hands, and I would call on them in class. So it kind of builds up people's confidence, makes them feel more comfortable talking about the material, and it's a good way to make sure you're having a pretty thorough discussion. And I noted here that I had all these discussion questions posted on my PowerPoint. This was important for like a lot of reasons. If any students are hard of hearing, it's really essential that we show them what the questions are so that they don't have to ask us to repeat ourselves or feel singled out in class. Also, many of you may have international students for whom English isn't a first language. And that's an added challenge as an instructor, and we want to make sure we're catering to everyone's needs. So by putting discussion questions up on the board, that's a very nice like universal design. It helps everyone. Okay. And just a note on expected responses. So these are required for every discussion question that you pose. They're a really good tool for you because if students are staring at you and they're not answering a discussion question, you can kind of guide them into it. However, assuming you all excellent students who want to participate in everything, they're also a good way for you to gauge like how your class is going to go. You're not going to be able to predict every response that your students are going to give, and that's just a fact. However, if you're just listing your discussion questions and not the expected responses, you may not predict effectively enough where your class is going to go, and it can really help you make a better transition too if you're thinking about, how would a first year student see this question and how would they respond? It just adds that higher level of understanding as a peer instructor that will help make your class better. And another note I added on transitions is that you would never give them time in your lesson plan. You always write like not applicable. This was always helpful for me because I had a tendency to write a lot and kind of long transitions. So like if activities run a little short, discussions, sometimes they'll be like way over time. Sometimes they'll be a little bit under time. And transitions are a way to like help you stay, I guess, on top of things if things are running a little bit short. So the next activity I had was my female faculty scavenger hunt activity. So writing the way that you plan to divide your students into groups is actually really helpful, and it sort of seems easy. Like on my first lesson plan submission, I was like, okay, I'll put students into 4 groups. And if you're standing in front of your class and you have to figure out the best way to do that, it's kind of like the transition thing where you don't want to be standing there like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. It seemed easy when you're writing the lesson plan, but when you're actually implementing your course, you want to have everything set up for success, because if you get caught off guard, it's going to make you feel uncomfortable and you're not going to teach in the best possible way. So you don't want to waste time thinking about how to do it. So like the easiest way to do this is to like put sticky notes on random desks with different colors or a number or a symbol, and then later on they'll see that that's their group. You can also number them off. Regardless of how you want to do it, you just have to tell your summer reader. So that's an added level of detail that FIGS expects. As I mentioned earlier, I would put X in my lesson plans when I wasn't sure how large my class would be. So for this female faculty scavenger hunt, you saw this, but you saw it a little bit different than how I actually implemented it. They had a few more questions. They had a bunch of questions that I had them answer, and I handed out worksheets. And I just want to emphasize that anytime you have an activity like this planned, you really should have an answer key for yourself. You upload this like at the end of the semester with a final submission of all your like course planning documents. But you really want to have this answer key for yourself, because if students can't find it, you want to make sure that the information actually exists somewhere. So I would put answers, and I would put like the website where I found the information for these kinds of things. They totally don't have to be that involved, but like you want to be able to guide your students in the right direction, if that makes sense. As you can see, here is a really ginormous transition. That was my style, doesn't have to be yours. So my transition went into the case study, which you saw the beginning of. I just wanted to introduce that format to you. Because it can actually be a really unique way to present information, but I want to disclose that that's not how I did it in my real class. It was not that good. I did something called a gallery walk here, and I'm not sure if any of you know what that is, but basically you would put stations up around the room, and you'd put little information, like informational sheets at each station, and students would go around and usually fill out a worksheet with guiding questions. So I did that, but when Susan and I were discussing the best way to present this to you, we decided to make it into a case study because it's more sciencey, not to be like shticky like that. But we thought it would be a more engaging and definitely a more unique way to teach this material. My questions were originally pretty straightforward. And so if you want to get your students exciting are excited about the material that you're covering, you really have to make sure that you're writing engaging lesson plans with creative activities. You just have to think a little bit outside the box. We didn't go over the actual activity in class as a group because we just didn't have time. But I wanted to show you in general what it would look like. So this was, whoa. Okay, I'm just going to close that. I will send all of you, and I'm going to upload it as well, the worksheet that I created for this. I just listed basically a paragraph that I read in the lesson plan that you saw. And I just basically said, Jane's a first-year student majoring in cell biology and neuroscience. And I just inserted some background information. And I wrote the 7 questions that I showed you right at the end of my lesson plan demo. And so generally, I would just hand those out. And I'd given students groups earlier in the lesson plan. However, Susan mentioned to me that I can also pre-label handouts with a number. And then when I hand them out, they automatically have their groups. So Susan is a professional staff, and that is a much better, much easier idea than what I gave you, but totally listen to her. So that's one way that you can group people up. And as I mentioned, when I wrote those questions, I would always fill in the answers to things that I could answer. But I want to emphasize that in my list of questions, a lot of them were like, what do you think that she as a CBN major would want to study? And it's kind of subjective. Students can see what they think relates to cell bio and put it in there. But I also had some questions at the end that were personal to them, asking, are you interested in this? Which program would you want to do? How do you want to prepare for that? And I would fill that out with expected responses, as you would do for a discussion question, because it's going to vary. Okay. So here I have another transition, out of it, and I didn't do this just for the sake of time. But I want to emphasize here that I gave a little bit of my own story about research. And telling your story is a really great way for students to be engaged and to make sure the lesson plan feels really genuine. You want to make sure that they want to listen to you and they want to hear all about your college experience. It's really nice how much they look up to you. So give them all the information they want. Here it says, end the demo here. That is where I ended the demo. So the transition went into another activity, which is talking about the learning and writing centers. And that is another part of the academic success element that is a little bit challenging to cover. I had actually never been to the writing centers. I didn't have to take XPOS, which was great. Hi, I'm teaching right now. I'm sorry. Sorry. And I had been to learning centers only as a TI. So it was a little difficult for me to model this activity. But when in doubt, I like to have my students make posters because I think it's a fun way for them to be more creative than they would be in a normal lecture. It's also kind of de-stressing if they're writing out these pretty basic posters, but getting to use colorful markers can do a little bit of good for your students. And in here, I want to note how much I divided my time. So it's a 20-minute activity to make these posters. But I wanted to make sure that when I was teaching it, I had benchmarks for myself. So I would give them 15 minutes to research it, and I would give myself 5 minutes to allow the students to present the information. And at the end of this activity, I told them I was going to be taking the posters, scanning them, and uploading them onto Sakai, and that's an accountability tool. If the students know that their information is going to be on the internet forever, they're going to be a little more inclined to produce a higher level of quality work. I had another discussion after it. In general, when I have an activity or a reading, I would always put discussions after it because I want to make sure that they are getting the information and they are processing it in the way that I'd like them to, and they're getting what FIGS wants them to get out of it. My last few notes are that I ended this class with an exit slip. I would do this on occasion, but especially in the beginning weeks of the class to try to see, did they get the lesson that I wanted them to learn? And how can they use the resources that we discussed today to achieve their goals? And it's also nice because you can get to know them a little bit and you can address their answers in the first few minutes of class when you get back. So these accomplishments from today's lesson, you always have to write 3. And they're kind of a way for you to determine whether students are getting what you want them to get out of the information. And if you're having trouble thinking of what the students would accomplish from your lesson plan, then you probably need to go back and improve the clarity of it. And I copied the wrong comment here, I think, which is silly, but my announcement for the next class was that they had to arrive to proteomics early, and proteomics is where we had our excursion. So if you choose to have an excursion in your lesson plan, you need to make sure you tell them when it is, because if I hadn't reminded my students exactly how to get to this building, exactly where it is, like they could really get lost or get confused or show up at your classroom and not realize what's wrong. And I think that is it for my lesson plan document. So I'm gonna stop that. And do you have any questions? I know that was a lot all at once. But I'm hoping that because it was a lot, there's a lot you'd want to ask me about.
It's not quite related, but do we actually have any like resources to kind of help us cover a lot of these university resources? So I've never done a writing center, I've never done tutoring, I didn't ever look into a RESTE, so these are a lot of things which I have absolutely zero knowledge of.
So when I had SI1 last year, we had presentations from a lot of these places, and unfortunately, like one of the consequences of having an online SI1 means we don't get to have that. However, there's a bunch of really informational websites, and every requirement is listed on the ITE document, which we'll see later, integrating the elements. And you can go on all the Rutgers websites, and you can totally ask me or the rest of the SPI group, and we'll be able to help you, because out of all of us, someone's bound to have done at least, one of the things that you need help on.
Awesome, thank you.
I had a question on the on the demo that we watched of you doing. So, like when you're presenting the career, like not a lot, but a bit of it was lecturing, and you were kind of just speaking off the PowerPoint. But you did have like questions here and there that they would do the think, pair, share. So, like I know they don't necessarily recommend lecturing, and you don't want it to like get away from you. So, like, what's the tip that you have to like know when to stop, or how much information you can lecture about or present?
So for my career spotlights, that was kind of the most lecturing things I would do in my lesson plans, because you kind of have to do that. That way, you're given a lot of specific requirements of what to cover in a career spotlight. So my biggest tip was, if you know you have to get lectury, minimize the time. Like, I think my career spotlights would be a max of 10 minutes. The only times they would be 15 minutes would be if people were raising their like hands and asking questions. I happen to have a lot of pre-med students in my class, so when I talked about becoming a doctor, everyone was like, that was a really long career spotlight. But it was because people were engaging, and the one that I showed you is a relatively short one. So when you cannot avoid the lecture, minimize it. Eva, do you have a question, or are you waving to someone? You're good. Would love to get one more question before we wrap up things today. If anyone has anything that you think of.
Okay, I have a question. So thinking about like any lesson plan, I kind of get like overwhelmed. So I kind of like made like a really rough like outline of what I would want to cover in the course. Is there going to be a time where we like have a structured way to do that, like a big plan, so we can have an overview of like what we're covering and like the pace at which we're going to like go through information?
Sure. So I'm actually not positive if you have the whole 10-week template yet. I don't actually remember, but how I did that, there's not really, except for when you can put like in the template, you can put the weeks and you can put the elements that you'd like to cover it. But that's not really what you're asking for, and I hear that. So what I did was I had a note in my phone, and I put like week 1, week 2, blah, blah, blah. And I would put like, most importantly, I'd put the element. And whatever like week you assign the element to, it doesn't really matter at that point. But I would use that as my brainstorming note. And over like probably 2 months, if I came up with an idea, I would just jot it down in there and use that. I'm sorry, 1 second. Okay. I see your, I'll answer them just in a second. But if you use like notes, or if you have a journal, that's kind of your best bet. Once you have the template for all 10 weeks, then you can start putting things in. I would just work on that as I would go, and sometimes I would even put things in as like comments or suggestions, and I wouldn't approve the change until I was like, okay, that is actually like the level of quality I want in my lesson plan. But you have time, you have the benefit of time now, so don't be too stressed about the entire 10-week submission. And Mitsu's question was, on average, how many activities could you fit in each lesson plan? So that's a hard question to answer because it depends. And if you count discussions as activities, it depends, because if you're doing 10-minute ones, you can do like 8. If you're, you know what I'm saying? But that's like a silly answer because you obviously know how to do that division. I would say you could have at least like 3 really well thought out activities. And it also depends on limitations. If your career's in the sciences and you have to do a career spotlight, or if you have to lecture a little bit about one resource or another, it's going to change it. But I think that you can usually fit about 3 really good activities and then discussions as well. Does anyone else have any more questions? Oh, I can't hear you, Eva. But you were, maybe type into the box because I can't hear what you're saying. I'm sorry. Apologies. Thank you for typing it in. Okay, cool. Awesome. Another point for someone else's question. How wonderful. Everyone is sharing with each other. So because the chat is not saved in the recording, something I also didn't realize in my teaching demo, embarrassing, I'm going to read it aloud once you type it. In the meantime, does anyone else have any other questions that I can answer while she's typing? How are you all feeling after seeing this, after seeing what like a FIGS class should look like?
I definitely didn't realize how much the elements and not actual content, like specifically like presentations, was part of the whole lesson plan.
Yeah, I think in some of my activities I could have done a better job at like making the smoothies, so to speak. Like my learning and writing centers poster, it was like I would have liked to make that a little bit more, I would say, nuanced in the way I approached it. But there's some things that are just to be so challenging, you just address it, and that's okay. Not every activity has to be the most beautiful, perfect activity that you've ever done before. But yeah, I think it can seem like a lot, but there are so many ways within the 10 weeks especially that you can get your topical area information across. Like, do not even worry, you'll get to teach careers in the sciences as much as you want. And then for careers in this spotlights in the careers in the sciences, when would we get more information about what to incorporate into it? So you would see that, I believe, in the document called the ITE, Integrating the Elements, which I believe are being presented about, if not this afternoon, you're going to see it this, I would say this weekend, but it's like Thursday. You're going to see it today or tomorrow. So that's when you get that information. Does anyone have any more questions before we end today's session? No? Okay, then I'm going to end the recording here. Stop.